Each recorded action speaks volumes. Every close observation uncovers facts. Protecting your civil rights, revealing definitive justice.
Don't play games with me. You think I don't know what this is?
Sir, it's my vehicle. The registration is inside.
Yeah, I've heard that one before. Nice car, clean story. Guys like you don't just roll through here in something like this.
I'm active duty Navy. I can show you my ID.
At 7:14 a.m. at a rural gas station off Highway 9 in Coulter County, Georgia, a black man in civilian clothes stood at pump number 3, filling a black Chevy Tahoe. He wore a plain gray t-shirt, jeans, and running shoes. Nothing about him drew attention. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't looking around. He was just pumping gas on a quiet Tuesday morning, the same way millions of Americans do every single day. The man was Senior Chief Darnell Sutton, 38 years old, an active-duty Navy SEAL with 16 years in special operations. He had spent the last 2 weeks on leave visiting his mother in Albany, and now he was driving back to Naval Station Norfolk for a scheduled debrief. His military ID was in his wallet. His registration and insurance were in the glove box. His leave papers were folded inside a manila envelope on the passenger seat. Everything was in order. None of it would matter for the next 40 minutes. A Coulter County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the station lot and parked diagonally behind the Tahoe, blocking it in. The driver's side door opened slowly. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove stepped out. He was 52 years old, 26 years in the department, elected 3 times by a county that was 68% white and had never once questioned how he ran things. He was tall, broad, and unhurried. His hand rested on his duty belt as he walked toward the pump. His eyes were already locked on Sutton. Not on the vehicle, not on the plates, on the man. Hargrove stopped 6 feet away, feet planted wide, chin tilted up. "That your vehicle?" Sutton turned, nozzle still in hand. "Yes, sir." Hargrove didn't acknowledge the answer. He stepped past Sutton and circled the Tahoe slowly, peering through the tinted windows, running his hand along the rear door frame as if checking for something. He paused at the back, looked at the plates, then looked at Sutton again. "This vehicle matches a stolen report out of Valdosta. Black Tahoe, recent model." Sutton's expression didn't change. His voice stayed even. "I have the registration right in the glove box. I can show you." Hargrove ignored the offer entirely. He didn't ask for the registration, didn't ask for a license, didn't run the plates. Instead, he pointed at the hood. "Step away from the vehicle. Hands on the hood. Now." Sutton set the nozzle back in the pump, stepped forward, and placed both palms flat on the hood of his own car. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. 16 years of training had taught him to assess a situation before reacting. And right now, every instinct told him this man had already made up his mind. What Sutton didn't know yet was that 2 cameras were already recording. The gas station's exterior security system captured the lot from 2 angles in continuous, high-definition footage. And 30 feet away, parked near the air pump, a long-haul truck sat idling with a dash cam mounted on the windshield, capturing a wide-angle view of everything unfolding at pump number 3. The driver, a man named Earl Jessup, was inside the station eating a biscuit sandwich. He wouldn't learn what his camera had recorded until hours later, but when he did, that footage would change everything. Hargrove keyed his radio and called for backup. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs, 29 years old, 3 years on the job, Hargrove's hand-picked protege. Skaggs had been hired straight out of the sheriff's personal recommendation. No prior law enforcement experience, no academy honors, just a last name Hargrove knew from church, and a willingness to follow orders without asking questions. He arrived in under 4 minutes, cruiser pulling in fast, gravel popping under the tires. He stepped out and walked straight to Hargrove's side without once looking at Sutton, like a person. Together they ran the plates. The results came back clean. The Tahoe was registered to Darnell Sutton at an address in Virginia Beach, Virginia. The VIN matched. There was no stolen vehicle flag, no warrants, no alerts of any kind. The system had given them every reason to let him go. Hargrove didn't let him go. He looked at the screen on Skaggs's cruiser laptop and shook his head. Registration could be forged. These guys are sophisticated now. Clone a VIN, swap plates, drive it right across state lines. Sutton stood with his palms still flat on the hood of his own vehicle, the morning heat already warming the metal beneath his hands. He spoke without turning around. "I have my military ID and leave orders in the vehicle. I'm active duty Navy. I can show you everything right now." Hargrove stepped closer. "I don't care about military papers. You can buy a uniform at any surplus store. Doesn't mean you earned it." Skaggs laughed, a short, ugly sound that carried across the lot. Sutton said nothing. His fingers pressed harder into the hood, but he didn't move. Hargrove walked to the passenger side of the Tahoe and tried the handle. It was locked. He turned to Sutton. "Open it." Sutton kept his voice level. "I do not consent to a search. There's no probable cause." Hargrove didn't pause. He turned to Skaggs. "Open it. We've got exigent circumstances." There were no exigent circumstances. No weapon in plain view, no odor of contraband, no indication of danger. Just a clean registration, a cooperating man, and two officers who had already decided what they wanted to find. Skaggs used a Slim Jim from his cruiser to pop the lock. They started with the back seat. A duffel bag, zipped open and dumped across the seat. Gym clothes, toiletries, a paperback novel. Then the garment bag. Skaggs unzipped it and pulled out a set of navy dress blues, pressed and squared away, ribbons pinned in perfect order. Hargrove took the uniform from Skaggs and held it up by the hanger, turning it in the light like a prop. He looked at Skaggs with a half grin. "You ever seen a real Navy SEAL?" Skaggs glanced at Sutton, then back at the uniform. "Not one that looks like him." They both laughed. Sutton heard every word. His jaw tightened. His breathing stayed controlled. Behind the gas station counter, a young white woman named Colleen Fitch stood motionless, her phone raised to the window, recording. She had started filming the moment the second cruiser pulled in. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The camera was catching everything, the laughter, the uniform held up like a joke, and the man at the hood who had earned every ribbon on it, standing in silence while two men who hadn't mocked him for it. Hargrove pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt and grabbed Sutton's left wrist without warning. "Turn around, hands behind your back." Sutton turned slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "What am I being charged with?" "Suspicion of grand theft auto and possession of stolen property." Hargrove snapped the first cuff tight. "The plates came back clean," Sutton said. "The VIN matches my registration. You know this vehicle isn't stolen." Hargrove yanked the second wrist back and locked the cuff. "We'll sort that out at the station." Out on Highway 9, cars had begun to slow. A white minivan with a family inside drifted past at half speed, the mother in the passenger seat staring through the window, one hand over her mouth. A pickup truck pulled onto the shoulder briefly, then moved on. A man on a motorcycle slowed, looked, and kept riding. They all saw the same thing. A black man in handcuffs standing beside his own vehicle while two officers treated him like he'd committed the crime of the century. Hargrove gripped Sutton by the back of the neck and steered him toward the cruiser. When they reached the rear door, Hargrove pushed Sutton's head down hard, far harder than necessary. Sutton's shoulder caught the edge of the doorframe. The impact twisted his upper body sideways, and his forehead struck the plexiglass partition inside the cruiser. A small cut opened just above his left eyebrow. A thin line of blood ran down toward his eyelid. Sutton didn't cry out, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. He sat back against the seat, hands cuffed behind him, blood slowly tracking down the side of his face, and he breathed. Slow and measured. The way he'd been trained to breathe when everything around him was falling apart. The way he breathed in rooms most people would never know existed. He waited. At the Coulter County Sheriff's Office, Sutton was processed like a man who had committed a violent felony. They took his mugshot under fluorescent lights, the cut above his eyebrow still fresh, blood dried in a thin line down his temple. They rolled his fingerprints. They confiscated his wallet, his phone, his watch, his military ID, and the manila envelope containing his leave orders. Every item was bagged, tagged, and placed in a locker behind the intake desk, as if it were evidence in a murder case. He was walked down a narrow hallway and placed in a holding cell with a concrete bench and a steel toilet. The door locked behind him with a sound that echoed off every wall. Sutton sat on the bench. "I'd like to make a phone call." Hargrove stood on the other side of the bars, arms crossed. "You'll get one when we're done processing." Then he walked away. 1 hour passed, then 2, then 3. No phone call, no water, no update, no explanation. The processing had taken less than 15 minutes. The rest was silence and concrete. Down the hall in Hargrove's office, the sheriff and his deputies sat across from each other writing their arrest report. The document they produced bore almost no resemblance to what had happened at that gas station. It stated that the subject was evasive and uncooperative during questioning. It stated that the subject made furtive movements toward the vehicle, consistent with an attempt to flee. It stated that the subject refused to provide identification and became verbally combative when asked to comply with lawful orders. Every line was a lie. Every sentence was designed to justify what the cameras had already proven was unjustifiable. And while Hargrove signed his name at the bottom of that report, the black Chevy Tahoe sat in the station's impound lot, already confirmed clean through 3 separate database checks. No stolen flag, no VIN discrepancy, no alert of any kind. Hargrove had seen the results. He had buried them. Because admitting the vehicle was clean meant admitting the arrest was wrong. And Dwight Hargrove had not admitted he was wrong in 26 years. He wasn't going to start now. After 3 hours and 47 minutes, Hargrove appeared at the holding cell door. "You get 1 call." Sutton stood, walked to the desk phone at the end of the hallway, and dialed a number from memory. He didn't call a lawyer. He didn't call his mother. He called his commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. The call lasted less than 3 minutes. Sutton spoke in short, precise sentences. He gave his name, rank, and service number. He stated his location. He described the stop, the search, the cuffs, the cut on his forehead, the fabricated charge, and the 4 hours without a phone call or water. He said, "I'm being held at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office in Georgia. The vehicle is mine. The plates are clean. They know it's clean." His commanding officer, Captain Leon Briggs, asked one question. "Are you injured?" "Small cut above my eyebrow. I'm fine." Briggs said, "Sit tight. We're making calls." The line went dead. Within 20 minutes, Captain Briggs had contacted NCIS, the Navy JAG Corps, and the Department of Defense Liaison for Law Enforcement Affairs. Within 40 minutes, phones were ringing at the Coulter County Sheriff's Office from numbers with Washington, D.C. area codes. The desk sergeant, a woman named Pam Gunther, who had worked the front desk for 9 years, answered the first call with the same flat tone she used for noise complaints and parking disputes. She didn't understand what was happening. The voice on the line asked to speak with the officer in charge of the detention of Senior Chief Darnell Sutton. She transferred the call to Hargrove. He picked up the receiver in his office, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Sheriff Hargrove?" What he heard next straightened his spine. The voice on the other end identified themselves as a representative from the Pentagon's Office of General Counsel. The tone was not a request. It was a notification. And for the first time that morning, the confidence in Dwight Hargrove's face cracked. While Sutton sat in a holding cell staring at a concrete wall, 2 things happened simultaneously that he knew nothing about. The first began behind the counter of the gas station off Highway 9. Colleen Fitch, the 23-year-old attendant who had watched the entire encounter through the store window, sat in the back office during her break and opened her phone. She had recorded 4 minutes and 11 seconds of footage, starting from the moment Skaggs pulled the dress blues out of the garment bag. The video showed the uniform held up like a costume. It showed 2 officers laughing. It showed a man in handcuffs being shoved headfirst into a cruiser. She uploaded it to 3 platforms with a single caption. "Sheriff just arrested a black man for driving his own car. He's military." Within the first hour, the video had 12,000 views. By the second hour, it had crossed 40,000. Comments flooded in. Shares multiplied, local activist pages picked it up. A civil rights attorney in Atlanta reposted it with the words, "This is Coulter County. This is what they do." The second thing happened 30 miles north at a truck stop off Interstate 16. Earl Jessup, the long-haul driver who had been parked at the gas station that morning eating a biscuit sandwich, saw the video on his phone while scrolling during a fuel stop. He recognized the gas station immediately. Then he recognized the Tahoe. Then he remembered his dash cam. He pulled the footage from the device and watched it. His camera had captured the entire encounter from a wider angle, the cruiser blocking the Tahoe in, the circling, the pat-down, the search, the cuffs, the shove, all of it from a clean, unobstructed vantage point. Jessup called the local news station in Savannah. He told them what he had. They told him not to delete anything and sent a crew to meet him within the hour. By early afternoon, the Coulter County Sheriff's Office was receiving media inquiries from outlets it had never heard of, asking questions it had no answers for. And Dwight Hargrove, sitting behind his desk with a phone that wouldn't stop ringing, was beginning to realize that the quiet arrest he had made at pump number 3 was no longer quiet. Hargrove closed his office door and told Skaggs to sit down. "The video is online," he said. Skaggs had already seen it. His face was pale. Hargrove pulled up the arrest report on his computer and stared at it. The line about Sutton attempting to flee stood out now like a lit fuse. "We need to clean this up," Hargrove said. He began editing the document, softening the language, removing the claim about furtive movements, replacing verbally combative with initially uncooperative. Skaggs watched but said nothing. He didn't object. He didn't question it. He sat in the same silence he had maintained at the gas station and let Hargrove rewrite the record. When the revised version was saved, Hargrove picked up the phone and called the county attorney, Vernon Poole. He explained the situation in broad terms, downplaying the force, omitting the cut on Sutton's forehead, framing the video as misleading and out of context. Poole listened, then asked one question. "Is the vehicle stolen?" Hargrove paused. "No." "Release him," Poole said. "Right now. No further statements, no press comments, nothing. Just let him go." Hargrove pushed back. "If we release him now, it looks like we were wrong. If you hold him any longer," Poole said, his voice flat, "this becomes federal. It may already be." Hargrove hung up. He sat for a long moment, jaw working, fingers drumming the desk. Then he made one more call. He ordered the Tahoe towed from the station impound lot to a secondary facility 30 miles south in Jessup. When Sutton was finally brought out of the holding cell, Hargrove handed him a clear plastic bag containing his wallet, phone, and watch. His military ID and leave papers were inside a separate envelope. No apology, no explanation. Hargrove told him the charges were being reviewed and that his vehicle would be available for retrieval once the investigation concluded. Sutton asked where the vehicle was. Hargrove said, "Jessup, 30 miles south. You can pick it up when we're done." Sutton stood on the front steps of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office at 4:17 in the afternoon. No vehicle, no ride. A cut above his eyebrow held together by dried blood. A town he'd never been to, and no reason to trust a single person in it. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking. The next morning, 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. The men and women who stepped out wore no uniforms, but their credentials spoke louder than any badge in the building. 2 NCIS special agents, a Department of Defense civil rights investigator, a representative from the FBI's Civil Rights Division. They walked through the front door at 8:06 a.m. and asked to speak with Sheriff Dwight Hargrove. Pam Gunther, the desk sergeant, stared at the federal IDs laid across her counter and picked up the phone without a word. Within the first hour, the investigators had secured the gas station's exterior security footage, both angles, full resolution, time-stamped. They had Earl Jessup's dashcam footage, already preserved by the Savannah news station that had copied it the day before. They had Colleen Fitch's phone video, downloaded directly from her device with her full cooperation. And then they found what Hargrove had hoped no one would look for. 2 versions of the arrest report. The original, filed at 1:42 p.m. the previous day, claiming Sutton was evasive, uncooperative, and attempted to flee. And the amended version, saved at 3:58 p.m. just hours later, with the language softened and the fleeing claim removed. The metadata was intact. The timestamps were undeniable. An NCIS agent placed both versions side by side on Hargrove's own desk and said, "You want to explain why there are two of these?" Hargrove called for his attorney. The interviews that followed took the rest of the day. Colleen Fitch described what she saw from behind the counter. The stop, the search, the laughter, the uniform held up like a prop. Earl Jessup described the cruiser pulling in at an angle, blocking the Tahoe before a single word had been spoken. Two motorists who had slowed on Highway 9 gave statements describing Sutton in cuffs, compliant and still, while Hargrove shoved him into the cruiser. Three customers inside the gas station described hearing the exchange through the open door. Every account matched. Sutton was calm. Sutton was cooperative. Sutton never raised his voice, never resisted, never moved without being told to. The sheriff was aggressive. The sheriff was mocking. The deputy followed without question, and the two reports sitting on the desk confirmed what the footage already proved: that Hargrove hadn't just arrested an innocent man, he had tried to bury it afterward. The federal investigation did not stop at the gas station. It went deeper. Investigators subpoenaed 5 years of arrest records from the Coulter County Sheriff's Office. Every traffic stop, every detention, every use of force report filed under Hargrove's authority. The data analysts who reviewed the numbers didn't need long to see the pattern. It was staggering. 74% of all traffic stops personally initiated by Hargrove involved Black or Latino drivers, in a county that was 68% white. The numbers alone would have been damning, but the paper trail made it worse. Investigators pulled complaint files from storage rooms and filing cabinets in the basement of the sheriff's office. Some were in folders so old the edges had yellowed. 8 prior allegations of excessive force. 11 formal complaints of racial profiling. Every single one had been reviewed and dismissed internally, and every single one had been dismissed by Hargrove himself. As elected sheriff, he oversaw his own disciplinary process. He was the complaint department. He was the review board. He was the final word. And his final word, in every case, was that nothing had happened. Then the witnesses came forward. 3 former deputies, all of whom had left the department within the past 4 years, contacted federal investigators through an anonymous tip line. Their accounts painted a picture of a department rotting from the top. Racial slurs were common in the break room and on ride-alongs. Hargrove referred to certain neighborhoods in the county using terms no official should ever speak aloud. Deputies who pushed back or refused to participate in targeted stops were quietly reassigned to overnight shifts, denied promotions, or pressured until they resigned. One of the 3 former deputies provided something the investigators hadn't expected: a recording. It was audio from a department barbecue 2 summers earlier, captured on a phone that had been left recording on a picnic table. In the recording, Hargrove could be heard telling a joke to a circle of deputies. The joke was about a black man driving a nice car and getting pulled over for stealing it. The punchline got laughs. It was the exact scenario he had manufactured against Darnell Sutton at pump number 3. When federal investigators played that recording in a closed briefing room, no one in the room said a word. They didn't need to. The pattern wasn't just visible. It was documented, repeated, and systemic. And it had been protected for over a decade by the one man who was supposed to prevent it. A federal grand jury convened in the Southern District of Georgia. The proceedings lasted 2 days. The evidence was presented methodically. The gas station footage, the dash cam footage, Colleen Fitch's phone video, the original arrest report and the amended version with its damning metadata, the 5 years of stop data, the buried complaints, the former deputy's testimony, the barbecue recording. On the second day, the grand jury returned indictments. Sheriff Dwight Hargrove was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, conspiracy to obstruct justice for the falsified and amended arrest reports, and filing false statements in connection with a federal investigation. Deputy Ronnie Skaggs was indicted as a co-conspirator and charged with accessory to civil rights violations. He had followed every order. He had laughed at every joke. He had stood by while an innocent man was searched, cuffed, cut, and caged. The law had a name for that kind of silence. County Attorney Vernon Poole was investigated for his role in advising Hargrove during the hours between the arrest and the release. Prosecutors examined whether his instruction to release Sutton was damage control or genuine legal counsel. Poole cooperated fully, turned over phone records and emails, and provided a detailed timeline of his communications with Hargrove that afternoon. He avoided indictment, but his reputation in Coulter County would never fully recover. Hargrove posted bail and was suspended from duty pending trial. The governor's office issued a statement confirming that an interim sheriff would be appointed. 2 days later, Hargrove stood behind a podium outside the county courthouse and gave a press conference. His voice was steady, but his eyes were hard. He called the indictment a federal witch hunt, driven by media pressure and political agendas. He said he had served Coulter County faithfully for 26 years and that he would be vindicated. The clip was picked up by national outlets within the hour. It went viral, but not in his favor. The comment sections filled with links to the gas station footage, screenshots of the arrest data, and quotes from the barbecue recording. Hargrove had spent 26 years controlling the narrative in Coulter County. He could not control this one. The federal trial began on a Monday morning in the Southern District of Georgia. It lasted 2.5 weeks. On the first day, prosecutors played all 3 video sources synchronized on split screens: gas station security, Earl Jessup's dashcam, Colleen Fitch's phone footage. The jury watched from 3 angles as Sutton complied with every command, while Hargrove circled, mocked, searched, and fabricated. They heard the surplus store comment. They heard Skaggs laugh. They watched Hargrove shove Sutton's head into the doorframe and saw the cut open above his eyebrow. Sutton testified on the 4th day with the precision of someone trained to deliver after-action reports. Every word, every gesture, every minute on that concrete bench. When asked why he didn't resist, he paused. Because I know what happens to a black man who resists, even when he's right, especially when he's right. 3 former deputies described a department culture built on slurs and selective enforcement. A statistical expert presented the arrest data. 74% of Hargrove stops targeted black or Latino drivers in a county that was 68% white. Hargrove's defense claimed he acted on a legitimate stolen vehicle report. Prosecutors proved no such report existed in any database. The jury deliberated 5 hours. Guilty on all counts. Hargrove received 6 years. Skaggs received 2. Neither man apologized. The civil lawsuit followed. Sutton filed against Coulter County, Hargrove, and Skaggs, citing unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, fabrication of evidence, and deliberate indifference. Discovery unearthed internal emails between county officials calling Hargrove's behavior a known issue, but noting he delivers results and the voters like him. The county settled for $4.2 million and entered a federal consent decree mandating independent oversight, mandatory bias training, body cameras, a civilian review board, and demographic reporting on all stops and arrests. Hargrove's name was removed from the department's wall of honor. His portrait was taken down from the courthouse lobby. No ceremony, no announcement. Just an empty hook on the wall and a faint outline where the frame had been. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Step out of the vehicle now.
Officer, this is my car. What is the issue?
You think I don't know what I'm looking at? Step out.
I can show you the
People like you don't just roll around in cars like this without answers.
My name is Nadira Osei. I
Yeah?
am a federal judge.
And I'm the governor. Out.
At 2:47 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon at a Sunoco station off Highway 9 in Beaumont County, Georgia, a white sheriff accused a black woman of stealing her own Cadillac Escalade. The woman was federal judge Nadira Osei, a sitting United States District Court judge with 9 years on the federal bench, a Harvard law degree, and a record of landmark civil rights rulings that had reshaped policy across the Southeast. The sheriff who approached her, Wade Purcell, had already decided, based on her skin color and the price of her vehicle, that she didn't belong behind the wheel. What happened over the next 45 minutes was captured on body camera, gas station surveillance, and multiple bystander cell phones. The footage would go viral within hours, federal agencies would be mobilized within days, and a sheriff who had operated without accountability for over a decade would finally face the kind of justice he had spent his career denying to others. Judge Nadira Osei had spent the morning visiting her elderly mother in a small rural town about 2 hours south of Atlanta. It was a trip she made once a month, always on a Saturday, always alone. She dressed casually for the drive, jeans and a cream-colored blouse, sunglasses on her head. Her black Cadillac Escalade was registered in her name, paid in full, and had been parked in the same federal courthouse garage every weekday for the past 4 years. She pulled into the Sunoco to fuel up for the last stretch home. She swiped her card, selected the grade, and stood by the pump scrolling through messages on her phone. It was quiet. A few other vehicles at the pumps. A clerk inside behind the counter. Nothing unusual. Then a marked Beaumont County Sheriff's cruiser pulled into the lot and parked at an angle near the air pump. Behind the wheel was Sheriff Wade Purcell, 56 years old, 11 years as the elected sheriff of Beaumont County. His eyes locked on Osei before his engine was off. He watched her for a few seconds, then his gaze moved to the Escalade. He reached for his radio. Possible 1057 at the Sunoco on Highway 9. Black female, late model Escalade. Running the plate now. He didn't wait for dispatch to respond. He was already stepping out of the cruiser, adjusting his belt, and walking toward her. Sheriff Wade Purcell had run Beaumont County like a personal kingdom for more than a decade. He ran unopposed in every election cycle, backed by a network of local officials and business owners who valued order over fairness. In a county where 38% of the population was black, his department was entirely white. Every deputy, every dispatcher, every administrative clerk. It wasn't an accident. It was a culture, and Purcell had built it from the top down. Over his career, 31 formal complaints of racial profiling had been filed against him or his deputies. Every single one had been reviewed internally and dismissed. Black residents had reported being stopped without cause, searched without consent, spoken to with language that left no room for interpretation. None of it had ever led to discipline. 2 prior Department of Justice inquiries had been opened into Beaumont County's policing practices. Both were quietly closed after political pressure from county officials and state-level allies who considered Purcell an asset to their vision of law and order. His deputies modeled his behavior because his behavior was rewarded. In Beaumont County, targeting black residents wasn't a fireable offense. It was standard practice. And the man who set the standard was now walking across a gas station lot toward a woman he had already decided was a criminal. Judge Nadira Osei was not someone who needed a title to command respect, but she had earned one that carried the full weight of the United States government behind it. She had been appointed to the federal bench 9 years earlier, nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate to sit on the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Georgia. Before that, she had spent 14 years as a federal prosecutor, trying cases involving public corruption, organized crime, and civil rights violations. She had argued twice before the United States Supreme Court and won both times. Legal scholars cited her rulings in textbooks. Attorneys across the Southeast knew her name and her reputation for fairness, precision, and an unwillingness to tolerate abuse of power in any form. But Nadira Osei was also a black woman who had grown up 40 minutes from the gas station where she now stood. Her mother had been a school teacher in a county where black teachers were paid less and promoted last. Her father had been a mechanic who built a small shop from nothing and kept it running for 30 years despite permits that were mysteriously delayed and inspections that came twice as often as they did for white-owned businesses down the road. She had watched her parents navigate a system designed to exhaust them into silence, She knew what Beaumont County was. She knew what men like Wade Purcell represented. She had spent her career dismantling the legal structures that protected them. None of that was visible at the pump. No robe, no gavel, no nameplate. She was simply a black woman in jeans standing beside an expensive vehicle in a rural Georgia county. And to Wade Purcell, that was enough. Purcell's boots hit the pavement with the deliberate weight of a man who expected compliance before he opened his mouth. He didn't greet her, didn't introduce himself, didn't ask if she needed help. He stopped 6 feet away, hand resting on his duty belt, and spoke with the flat authority of someone who had never been questioned in his own county. "Step away from the vehicle, ma'am." Osei turned from the pump, phone still in one hand. "Excuse me?" Purcell repeated himself, louder this time, his voice carrying across the lot. "I said step away from the vehicle." Before Osei could respond, a second marked cruiser swung into the station and parked at a sharp angle behind her Escalade, blocking her exit. Deputy Kyle Britton, 29 years old, 2 years on the job, stepped out and positioned himself near the rear bumper, one hand on his belt, mirroring his boss. Osei glanced at the blocked vehicle, then back at Purcell. "What is this about?" Purcell's jaw tightened. "This vehicle matches a report of a stolen SUV in the area. I need you to step away now." Osei's voice stayed level. "This is my vehicle. It's registered in my name. I can show you the registration right now. It's in the glove box." Purcell didn't move, didn't acknowledge the offer. His eyes stayed fixed on her face. "I'm not going to ask you again. Step away from the vehicle." A man filling up his truck at the next island stopped and turned. A woman in a minivan lowered her window to watch. Another woman at the pump across from Osei reached for her phone and began recording. The gas station attendant stepped outside the front door and stood with his arms folded, watching in silence. Osei lowered her phone and took one step back from the Escalade. She kept her hands visible, she kept her voice calm, and she kept her eyes on the man who had already decided she was guilty of something she hadn't done. Purcell pointed at the hood of the Escalade. "Hands on the vehicle, now!" Osei complied, placing both palms flat on the warm metal. She spoke clearly, her voice loud enough for the bystanders and cameras to hear. "I am complying with your instructions. I have not committed any crime. I am asking you to tell me the specific stolen vehicle report you are referencing." Purcell didn't answer. He jerked his chin toward Britton. "Check the interior." Britton opened the driver's side door without asking for consent, without presenting a warrant, without stating probable cause. He began searching the vehicle methodically, pulling items from the center console, opening the glove compartment, rifling through the back seat. He found a leather garment bag hanging from the rear headrest and unzipped it, revealing a black judicial robe folded neatly inside. He paused for a moment, looked at it, then tossed the bag onto the back seat and kept searching. He pulled out a manila folder thick with legal documents, flipped through several pages without reading them, and dropped them on the passenger seat. He opened Osei's purse, dumped the contents across the console, and sorted through her wallet, keys, lipstick, a small notebook, and a federal courthouse security badge with her photograph and full title printed beneath it. He didn't mention the badge to Purcell. He set it back on the pile and moved to the cargo area. At the pump, Osei stood motionless, palms on the hood, watching the search through the windshield. Her jaw was tight. Her breathing was controlled. 14 years as a federal prosecutor and 9 years on the bench had taught her exactly what was happening. Every element of this stop was illegal. No probable cause, no warrant, no reasonable suspicion that could survive even the lowest standard of judicial scrutiny. She knew it. And she knew the body camera on Purcell's chest was recording every second of it. Purcell's radio crackled. Dispatch responded to his earlier query. The plate came back clean. Vehicle registered to a Nadira A. Osei, residential address in Atlanta. No stolen vehicle flag, no warrants, no alerts of any kind. Purcell heard it. The body camera audio confirmed later that he pressed the radio to his ear, listened, and then lowered it without acknowledging the result. He did not tell Osei what dispatch had said. He did not instruct Britton to stop the search. He did not uncuff her, or step back, or apologize. Instead, he moved closer. The registration doesn't prove anything. You know how many people drive cars that aren't theirs? People like you get behind the wheel of vehicles like this and expect nobody to ask questions. Osei turned her head slightly, still compliant, still controlled. People like me? Purcell ignored the question. I'm going to need your license, registration, and proof of purchase for this vehicle. Osei's voice did not waver. I've already told you. The registration is in the glove box. Your deputy is currently searching my car without my consent. And I am telling you now, clearly and for the record, that I am a federal judge. My judicial credentials are in my bag. You can verify my identity immediately. The body camera captured what happened next with perfect clarity. Purcell's mouth curled into a half smile. He tilted his head slightly, and then he laughed. A short, dismissive sound that carried across the lot. Sure you are, sweetheart. Britton, still leaning into the cargo area of the Escalade, glanced back over his shoulder and smirked. Neither of them checked the credentials. Neither of them ran her name. Neither of them paused for even a moment to consider that the woman standing with her palms on the hood of a fully paid-for Cadillac might be exactly who she said she was. The woman at the next pump kept recording. Her phone had been steady for over 4 minutes now. A second bystander, a young man in a work uniform, had started filming from near the air pump. The gas station's 4 exterior surveillance cameras continued their silent rotation, capturing every angle of a stop that had no legal basis and an interrogation that had just crossed the line from which there would be no walking back. Osei looked directly at Purcell. Her voice was quiet, but carried the precision of someone who had spent decades choosing words that would hold up under scrutiny. You are making a mistake you will not be able to undo. Purcell leaned in closer. The body camera recorded his face inches from hers. The only mistake here is your attitude. Purcell reached for her arm. Turn around. Osei turned slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and visible. For what reason am I being detained? Purcell didn't answer. He grabbed her left wrist and pulled it behind her back, then reached for her right. The motion was rough, unnecessary, the kind of force designed not to restrain, but to humiliate. Osei's shoulder twisted at an awkward angle as he yanked both arms together. She winced, but did not cry out. I am not resisting. I am complying with your instructions. I have committed no crime, and I do not consent to this detention. Purcell snapped the cuffs on. The metal bit into her wrists. He tightened them 1 click past where they needed to be. The body camera captured the sound, a sharp metallic ratchet that echoed against the concrete. He pushed her forward toward his cruiser. His hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades, forcing her to move faster than her footing allowed. Her sandal caught the edge of the curb, and she stumbled forward, both knees hitting the asphalt hard. Without her hands free to break the fall, her full weight landed on the pavement. The skin on both knees split open against the rough surface. Blood appeared immediately on her jeans. Purcell did not stop, did not ask if she was hurt, did not help her up. He grabbed her arm above the elbow and hauled her to her feet, then continued walking her toward the cruiser. Get in.
Britton opened the rear door. Osei ducked her head and lowered herself into the back seat, wrists throbbing, knees burning, the smell of hot vinyl and stale air surrounding her. The door slammed shut. The sound was final and heavy, the sound of a locked cage closing around a woman whose only crime was existing in a space where someone with a badge had decided she did not belong. At the pumps, the woman with the phone whispered to her husband, "Oh my God." The young man in the work uniform had moved closer, his camera capturing the blood on Osei's knees as she was walked to the cruiser. The gas station attendant stood frozen in the doorway, arms still folded, face tight with the expression of someone who had seen this kind of thing before, but never quite like this.
A white couple leaving the station slowed their car to a stop, the passenger rolling down her window, staring. No one intervened. No one said a word loud enough for Purcell to hear. The authority of the badge held everyone at a distance, even as every phone in that lot recorded evidence that would eventually tear that authority apart. Inside the cruiser, Osei sat still. Her back was straight despite the cuffs pulling her shoulders into an unnatural position. Her knees bled through the denim. Her wrists were already beginning to swell where the metal dug in. The windows were closed. The air conditioning was off. The Georgia afternoon pressed heat through the glass and turned the back seat into something close to an oven. She asked to make a phone call. Purcell, leaning against the driver's side door outside, didn't turn around. No. She asked again. I have a right to contact my attorney. You'll get your call when I say you get your call. She asked for a supervisor. Purcell turned his head just enough for the body camera to catch the edge of his expression. I am the supervisor. She asked for his badge number. He said nothing. She asked for his full name. Silence. She asked what charges she was being held on. Purcell walked away from the cruiser and stood near the pump island, talking to Britton in a voice too low for the body camera to pick up clearly. Osei sat in that back seat for 38 minutes. No charges were read. No Miranda rights were given. No booking process was initiated. No one brought water. No one checked her injuries. No one cracked a window. She was a sitting United States federal judge locked in the back of a county sheriff's cruiser at a gas station in broad daylight, and the man who put her there had not even bothered to confirm her name. At the 20-minute mark, Purcell returned to the cruiser. He leaned into the open window and looked at her the way a man looks at someone he considers beneath his time. You should have just shown some respect. This didn't have to go this way. Osei met his eyes through the partition. Her voice was raw from the heat, but steady. You detained me without cause. You searched my vehicle without a warrant. You used force on a compliant individual. You denied me the right to counsel. And you are recording all of it on your own body camera. Purcell stared at her for a long moment. Then he straightened up and walked back to Britton. Meanwhile, the video had already escaped the gas station. The woman at the pump, a retired schoolteacher named Yvonne Shelton, had posted her recording to Facebook with a single caption. They just arrested a black woman at the Sunoco for driving her own car. Within 30 minutes, the video had 40,000 views. Within an hour, it had been shared by 3 civil rights organizations and picked up by a local news affiliate. By the time Osei was still sitting in that back seat, hands going numb and blood drying on her jeans, the world was already watching what Wade Purcell had done. He just didn't know it yet. It was Britton who broke first. He had been standing near the hood of the cruiser, scrolling through his phone, while Purcell leaned against the pump island, chewing on a toothpick, when something on the screen made his face change. He looked up at Purcell, then back at the phone, then back at Purcell again. We need to run her name. Purcell shrugged. We ran the plate. That's enough. Britton's voice dropped. Wade, we need to run her name. Right now. Something in the deputy's tone made Purcell push off the island. He walked over and looked at Britton's phone. Britton had pulled up the Federal Judiciary Directory. On the screen was a photograph of Nadira A. Osei, United States District Judge, Northern District of Georgia. The face in the photo matched the woman in the back of his cruiser. Purcell stared at the screen for a long time. The body camera recorded the pause. It captured him blinking twice. It captured his hand reaching for the back of his neck. It captured the silence that stretched between 2 men who had just realized the magnitude of what they had done. Britton whispered, She told us. She told us who she was. Purcell said nothing. He turned and walked slowly to the cruiser. He opened the rear door. He reached in and unlocked the cuffs without making eye contact. The metal fell away from her wrists, leaving deep red impressions in skin that had already begun to bruise. You're free to go. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the blood on her knees, the swelling on her wrists, the 38 minutes in a sealed car in Georgia heat. No mention of the illegal search, the fabricated stolen vehicle claim, the laughter when she identified herself. Just 4 words, delivered in a flat tone, designed to close a door on something that was already far too large to contain. Osei stepped out of the cruiser. She stood in the lot and looked at Purcell for a long moment. The body camera captured her face, calm and unbroken despite everything. Her voice carried clearly across the pavement. "You were not free of what you just did." She did not wait for a response. She walked to her Escalade, where her belongings were still scattered across the seats from Britain's warrantless search. She collected her purse, her judicial credentials, her robe bag, her legal files. She placed everything back where it belonged with the quiet precision of a woman who understood that order mattered, that evidence mattered, that every detail from this moment forward would be scrutinized under a standard of review far higher than anything Wade Purcell had ever encountered. She got in the car. She started the engine. She pulled out of the Sunoco station and turned north toward Atlanta. But she did not go home. She drove directly to the FBI field office on Century Parkway. She walked in with blood still visible on her jeans and bruises forming on both wrists. She identified herself by name and title. She requested to speak with the special agent in charge, and within the hour, she was sitting in a secure room giving a detailed, sworn statement about everything that had happened at the gas station off Highway 9 in Beaumont County, Georgia. She brought her judicial credentials, her vehicle registration, her insurance documents, and photographs of her injuries taken on her phone in the Sunoco parking lot before she left. She provided the names she had memorized: Sheriff Wade Purcell, Deputy Kyle Britton. She provided the time of the stop, the duration of the detention, the specific words used. She recounted every statement, every refusal, every violation of the constitutional rights she had spent her career upholding for others, and that had just been stripped from her in a gas station parking lot by a man who laughed when she told him who she was. The FBI agent taking her statement asked if she wanted to pause. She said no. She said, "I want every word on the record." By Monday morning, the machinery of federal accountability was fully in motion. FBI special agents from the Atlanta field office had been formally assigned to the case. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division had been notified and had opened a preliminary inquiry before noon. The chief judge of the Northern District of Georgia, after being briefed on the incident over the weekend, issued a public statement that moved through legal circles like a shockwave. What happened to Judge Osei is not merely a personal injustice. It is an assault on the federal judiciary and the constitutional principles every officer of the law is sworn to uphold. The statement was unprecedented. Federal judges rarely commented publicly on active investigations. The fact that the chief judge had spoken at all signaled to every attorney, every agency, and every elected official paying attention that this case would not be handled quietly. Body camera footage was subpoenaed from the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department by 10 a.m. Monday. A federal preservation order was issued simultaneously, prohibiting any deletion, alteration, or transfer of digital files from the department's servers. Gas station surveillance footage was secured by FBI agents who arrived at the Sunoco before the morning shift change. The station manager provided full access without hesitation. 4 exterior cameras had captured the entire encounter from multiple angles, timestamps synchronized, resolution clear enough to read the text on Purcell's badge from 30 feet away. Bystander videos, now circulating across every major social media platform with a combined view count exceeding 6 million, were cataloged and entered into the evidentiary record. Yvonne Shelton, the retired teacher who had posted the first video, was contacted by federal investigators and provided a detailed witness statement along with the original, unedited file from her phone. But the body camera footage was the centerpiece. It was Purcell's own equipment, department issued, department maintained, activated by his own hand before he stepped out of the cruiser. It captured his radio call to dispatch before he had any interaction with Osei. It captured dispatch confirming the vehicle was not stolen. It captured him continuing the stop anyway. It captured the words "people like you" and the laugh after she identified herself as a federal judge. It captured the cuffs, the fall, the blood, the 38 minutes in a sealed cruiser, and the flat, unapologetic dismissal at the end. And then the scope of the investigation expanded beyond the gas station. Federal agents requested access to the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department's full complaint history, internal review records, personnel files, and dispatch logs going back 10 years. The county attorney initially attempted to push back, citing administrative burden. The U.S. Attorney's Office responded with a federal subpoena that arrived before the county attorney finished drafting his objection. What investigators found inside those records would turn one sheriff's worst day into the beginning of a reckoning that reached far beyond a single gas station in rural Georgia. The records told a story that the people of Beaumont County had been trying to tell for years. Nobody with the power to act had ever listened. Now, with federal investigators pulling files from every cabinet and server in the department, the full scope of what Wade Purcell had built became impossible to ignore. Traffic stop data showed that black drivers in Beaumont County were stopped at 7 times the rate of white drivers. In a county where black residents made up 38% of the population, they accounted for 81% of vehicle searches and 74% of roadside detentions. The numbers alone were damning. The details behind them were worse. 3 black men had been arrested on fraudulent stolen vehicle claims in the past 2 years alone. Each had been driving a late-model vehicle. Each had been stopped without a specific report or dispatch confirmation. Each had been cuffed, searched, and held for hours before being released without charges. None of them had received an apology. None of them had been told the basis for the stop. Their complaints had been filed internally and dismissed within days. A black-owned barbershop on the east side of town had been raided 8 months earlier on an anonymous tip alleging drug activity. Deputies entered without a warrant, forced the owner and 6 customers to the ground, and searched the entire premises. They found nothing. The shop owner filed a complaint. Internal Affairs reviewed it and concluded the officers had acted in good faith based on the information available. The anonymous tip was never traced or verified. A 17-year-old black teenager named Elijah Cook had been detained after a Friday night football game for matching a description. The description, according to the incident report, was a black male in dark clothing. Elijah was held for 14 hours in a holding cell without charges, without his parents being notified, and without access to a phone. When his mother finally located him the next morning, she was told it had been a misunderstanding. She filed a complaint. It was dismissed. Federal investigators found 31 formal complaints of racial profiling filed against the department over the past decade. Every single one had been reviewed by the same internal affairs process. Every single one had been dismissed. The review files were thin, sometimes only a single page. Several contained identical language copied from one dismissal to the next, as if the conclusion had been written before the investigation began. Dashcam footage from routine traffic stops revealed deputies using racial slurs during interactions with black motorists. In one recording, a deputy could be heard telling a black driver pulled over for a broken taillight, "You're lucky I'm in a good mood today. Next time, stay in your part of town." The footage had been uploaded to the department server and never reviewed by anyone. Internal emails painted the clearest picture of all. Investigators found a chain between Purcell and his senior deputies discussing how to handle what one deputy called problem complaints. Purcell's response was direct. File it, flag it, forget it. If they don't have a lawyer, it goes nowhere. In another email, a sergeant asked Purcell how to handle a business owner's request to keep certain people from loitering near a shopping plaza. Purcell replied, "Use discretion. If they don't belong, move them along. We support our business community." The sergeant's subsequent incident reports showed that every person moved along from that plaza over the following 6 months was black. 2 prior Department of Justice inquiries had been opened into Beaumont County's policing practices. Both had been initiated after clusters of complaints reached federal attention. Both had been quietly closed after county officials and state-level political allies intervened, characterizing the complaints as isolated incidents driven by anti-law enforcement sentiment. The DOJ attorneys assigned to those inquiries had recommended further investigation. Their recommendations had been overruled. The picture that emerged was not of a single bad stop at a gas station. It was a system. Built by one man, sustained by silence, protected by a structure that treated complaints from black residents as noise to be managed rather than evidence to be examined. Wade Purcell had not made a mistake that Saturday afternoon. He had done what he always did. The only difference was that this time, the woman he did it to had the power, the knowledge, and the standing to ensure that the system he built would be the thing that buried him. By the time federal investigators finished cataloging the evidence, the case had grown far beyond the Sunoco station, and the grand jury that would soon convene would not be hearing about one sheriff's bad afternoon. They would be hearing about a decade of institutionalized racism operating under the protection of a badge in a county where accountability had never once walked through the door. Until now. A federal grand jury was convened in the Northern District of Georgia 6 weeks after the gas station incident. The proceedings were sealed, but the scope of the investigation had already become unmistakable to anyone paying attention. FBI agents had spent weeks inside the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department, removing hard drives, copying server archives, interviewing current and former deputies, and collecting sworn statements from dozens of residents who had filed complaints over the years that had gone nowhere. The indictment, when it came, was devastating. Sheriff Wade Purcell was charged on multiple counts: deprivation of civil rights under color of law, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 242, conspiracy to deprive civil rights, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 241, false imprisonment, filing false official reports. Each count carried significant federal prison time. Together, they represented a systematic dismantling of the legal shield Purcell had worn for over a decade. Deputy Kyle Britton was indicted as a co-conspirator, charged with deprivation of civil rights and failure to intervene during an unlawful detention. His participation in the warrantless search of Osei's vehicle and his silence during the 38-minute detention formed the core of the charges against him. Prosecutors noted that Britton had multiple opportunities to intervene, to check Osei's credentials, to report the dispatch confirmation that the vehicle was not stolen, to stop the cuffs from going on. He had done none of those things. 2 additional deputies, Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott, were charged in connection with prior incidents uncovered during the federal investigation. Jessup had conducted the warrantless raid on the black-owned barbershop. Lott had detained 17-year-old Elijah Cook for 14 hours without charges or parental notification. Both had operated under Purcell's explicit guidance. Both had filed reports that investigators determined contained deliberate falsehoods designed to justify actions that had no legal basis. The arrest of Wade Purcell was carried out at 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning at the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department. Federal agents entered through the front door and walked past the reception desk where complaints from black residents had been filed and forgotten for years. They found Purcell in his office, coffee on his desk, framed commendations on the wall. He was read his rights, handcuffed, and escorted out of the building through the same front entrance he had walked through every morning for 11 years. The agents led him past his own deputies, past the dispatch desk, past the evidence room where body camera footage had been stored and never reviewed. His mugshot was taken at the Federal Processing Facility in Atlanta and released to the press by noon. It led every news broadcast in the state. The image showed a man who looked smaller than he had at the gas station. The confidence was gone. The badge was gone. The authority that had allowed him to laugh in the face of a federal judge was gone. What remained was a 56-year-old man in a federal holding facility, facing charges that could put him away for the rest of his functional career and define his name for the rest of his life. Britton was arrested the same morning. He did not resist. He said nothing during processing. His attorney released a statement calling the charges excessive and promising a vigorous defense. The statement convinced no one who had seen the footage. Jessup and Lott were arrested later that afternoon. Both were booked and released on bond. Both were stripped of their badges and firearms. Both were barred from entering the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department pending trial. In the span of a single morning, the department that had operated without oversight for over a decade lost its sheriff, a deputy, and 2 senior officers to federal indictments. The remaining staff were placed under the temporary supervision of the county administrator, who appeared at a brief press conference that evening and read a prepared statement that used the word accountability 4 times, without once acknowledging what had made it necessary. Back in Atlanta, Judge Osai was informed of the arrests through official channels. She made no public statement. She issued no comment to the media. She returned to her bench the following day and presided over her scheduled docket as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and the trial that would follow would ensure that the change was permanent. The federal trial of Wade Purcell began on a Monday morning in the same courthouse where Judge Nadira Osai had presided over cases for 9 years. She had recused herself as required. A visiting judge from the 11th Circuit was appointed to oversee the proceedings. The courtroom was full. Every seat in the gallery was taken. Reporters lined the back wall. Federal marshals stood at each exit. Outside, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps, holding signs and waiting for updates that would be relayed through the glass doors every time someone stepped out. The prosecution opened with the body camera footage. They played it from the beginning. The radio call to dispatch before Purcell had even stepped out of his cruiser. The approach. The command to step away from the vehicle. Osei's calm, repeated attempts to explain that the car was hers. Britton blocking her exit. The warrantless search. The credentials pulled from her bag and ignored. The dispatch confirmation that the vehicle was not stolen. Purcell's decision to continue anyway. The courtroom was silent as the footage played on 2 large monitors positioned for the jury and the gallery. The jury watched Purcell's hand shove Osei toward the cruiser. They heard the sound of her knees hitting asphalt. They saw the blood appear on her jeans. They watched her sit in a sealed cruiser for 38 minutes without charges, without water, without a cracked window in the Georgia heat. They heard Purcell tell her she should have shown some respect, and they heard him laugh when she told him she was a federal judge. The sound of that laugh hung in the courtroom like a verdict that had already been delivered. Then the prosecution played the dispatch audio. The jury listened to the confirmation that Osei's vehicle was clean, registered in her name, no flags, no warrants, no stolen vehicle report matching the Escalade. They listened to the timestamp. They noted that the confirmation came before the cuffs, before the search, before the fall. Purcell had known the car was not stolen, and he had continued anyway. Prosecutors then broadened the case beyond the gas station. They presented body camera footage from 22 other incidents involving Purcell and his deputies. The jury watched a montage of black residents being stopped, searched, detained, and humiliated across Beaumont County over a span of years. They watched the barbershop raid. They watched Elijah Cook, 17 years old, being led into a holding cell for matching a description that could have applied to half the young men in the county. They watched deputies using language on dashcam audio that made several jurors visibly recoil. 19 victims took the stand over the course of the trial. They described stops without cause, searches without consent, hours in detention without charges, language that made clear the only thing suspicious about them was the color of their skin. A woman named Gloria Fenton described being pulled from her car during a school pickup because her sedan looked like one reportedly involved in a hit-and-run 3 counties away. She was handcuffed in front of her 2 children. The report turned out to be for a vehicle of a different make and color. No apology was offered. Her complaint was dismissed in 4 days. A man named Samuel Drayton described being stopped while jogging in his own neighborhood. A deputy told him someone had reported a suspicious person. Drayton was wearing a reflective vest and running shoes. He was detained for 40 minutes. His complaint was filed internally and marked resolved, with no action taken. Each testimony built upon the last. Each one revealed the same pattern, and each one pointed to the same source. Judge Osei testified on the 9th day of the trial. She wore a dark suit, no robe, no insignia of office. She sat in the witness chair and recounted the events of that Saturday afternoon with the same calm precision she had shown at the gas station. She described the approach, the commands, the search, the cuffs, the fall, the 38 minutes in the cruiser. She described asking for a phone call and being denied. She described asking for a supervisor and being told Purcell was the supervisor. She described asking for his badge number and receiving silence. When the prosecutor asked how she felt during the detention, she paused for the first time. I have spent my career in courtrooms ensuring that the Constitution applies equally to every person in this country. In the back of that cruiser, with my hands cuffed and my knees bleeding, I understood for the first time what it feels like when it doesn't. The defense attempted to frame the stop as a legitimate response to a stolen vehicle concern. Purcell's attorney argued that his client had acted on reasonable suspicion and had followed department protocols for vehicle stops. The strategy collapsed almost immediately. Use of force experts testified that nothing in the encounter met the legal threshold for a Terry stop, let alone a full detention with handcuffs. Constitutional law professors explained that dispatch had confirmed the vehicle was not stolen before the cuffs were applied, eliminating any claim of reasonable suspicion. A former FBI behavioral analyst reviewed the body camera footage and identified what she described as targeted enforcement behavior, noting that Purcell's language, posture, and decision-making were consistent not with an officer investigating a crime, but with an officer acting on racial bias. Purcell took the stand in his own defense on the third week. His attorney walked him through the event slowly, attempting to present each action as measured and procedural. But under cross-examination, the facade fell apart. The prosecutor played the moment Purcell laughed at Osei's identification and asked him to explain what was funny. Purcell said he didn't recall laughing. The prosecutor replayed the audio. The jury watched Purcell's face as his own voice filled the courtroom. He had no answer. The prosecutor asked why he continued the detention after dispatch confirmed the vehicle was not stolen. Purcell said he wanted to be thorough. The prosecutor asked how 38 minutes in a sealed car without charges, water, or a phone call constituted thoroughness. Purcell did not respond. The prosecutor asked about the phrase, "people like you." Purcell said it referred to people who drive expensive vehicles, not to race. The prosecutor then played 4 dash cam recordings from other stops in which Purcell or his deputies used the same phrase, each time directed at a black motorist. Purcell stared at the table in front of him and said nothing. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was unanimous on every count. Guilty of deprivation of civil rights under color of law. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of false imprisonment. Guilty of filing false reports. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Several of the victims in the gallery held each other. A woman in the second row covered her mouth and wept. Purcell stood motionless as the verdicts were read. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder. Purcell did not react. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. The judge, speaking to a courtroom that was once again full, addressed Purcell directly. "You took an oath to uphold the law and instead used your badge as a weapon against the people you swore to protect. You did not do this once. You did it systematically, repeatedly, and without remorse, targeting citizens based on the color of their skin and relying on a system you built to ensure that no one would ever hold you accountable." Purcell was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, the maximum under the guidelines for the combined charges. Britain, who had pleaded guilty before trial in a cooperation agreement, received 3 years. Deputies Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott each received 18 months after entering guilty pleas and providing testimony that corroborated the pattern of directed enforcement under Purcell's command. Purcell was taken into federal custody immediately. He did not speak. He did not look at the gallery. He was led out through a side door in handcuffs, the same way he had led Nadira Osei to the back of his cruiser 2 months earlier. Except this time, there was no one to open the door and say he was free to go. The civil lawsuit was filed before the criminal trial concluded. Judge Osei was the lead plaintiff, but she was not alone. 34 additional plaintiffs joined the suit, each one a resident of Beaumont County who had been subjected to unlawful stops, searches, detentions, or harassment by Purcell's department over the preceding decade. Their cases had been documented during the federal investigation. Their complaints, once dismissed and buried, were now exhibits in a federal civil rights action. The suit named Sheriff Wade Purcell individually, Deputy Kyle Britton individually, Deputies Carl Jessup and Aaron Lott individually, and the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department as an institution. It cited unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, warrantless search and seizure, denial of due process, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and systemic discrimination in violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments and 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. The county's attorneys reviewed the evidence and understood immediately that there was no viable defense. The body camera footage from the gas station alone was indefensible. Combined with the footage from 22 other incidents, the internal emails, the complaint dismissal records, and the statistical data on racially disparate enforcement, the case was not one the county could survive at trial. Settlement negotiations were brief. The county agreed to pay $4.7 million. The amount was divided among the 35 plaintiffs based on the severity of the violations each had suffered. Judge Osei's portion was the largest, but she had made clear from the beginning that the money was not the point. The point was the consent decree. The terms imposed on Beaumont County were the most sweeping police reform measures the district had ever seen. The entire sheriff's department was placed under federal oversight for a minimum of 5 years. An independent civilian review board was created with full subpoena power, the authority to investigate complaints, and the ability to recommend termination of officers found to have engaged in misconduct. Every deputy in the department was required to complete mandatory bias training with quarterly evaluations. Those who failed were subject to immediate suspension and review. Body camera activation was made mandatory for every citizen interaction, every call for service, and every enforcement action, with severe penalties including termination for non-compliance. All body camera footage from business-related calls and traffic stops was to be reviewed monthly by the Civilian Oversight Board. Demographic data on all stops, searches, and detentions was to be collected and published in quarterly public reports. A zero-tolerance policy was codified for selective enforcement, requiring documented, articulable legal justification for every removal, detention, or arrest. The hiring practices of the department were overhauled. Within a year, the department that had operated for over a decade as an entirely white force added 11 black officers to its ranks, including its first black deputy chief, a 20-year law enforcement veteran named Camille Pryor, who had previously served with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. Pryor's first act was to reopen every dismissed complaint from the past 10 years for independent review. The $4.7 million settlement included a separate $400,000 compensation fund designated for the 47 individuals identified during the federal investigation as victims of discriminatory enforcement who had not been part of the original lawsuit. Each was contacted individually, informed of the fund, and offered access to legal counsel provided at no cost through a partnership with the ACLU of Georgia. Purcell's name was removed from the Beaumont County Law Enforcement Memorial, where it had been engraved 5 years earlier during a ceremony attended by the same county officials who had helped close the prior DOJ inquiries. The plaque was replaced with a simple inscription: "This department serves all residents of Beaumont County equally and without prejudice. The law belongs to everyone." Back in Atlanta, Judge Osei reviewed the consent decree through official channels. She made no public comment on the settlement. She issued no statement to the press. She returned to her courtroom and continued her work. But through her attorneys, she ensured that one additional provision was included in the final agreement. Every new deputy hired by the Beaumont County Sheriff's Department would be required, on their first day, to watch the body camera footage from the Sunoco station in its entirety. All 45 minutes of it. From the radio call before Purcell left his cruiser, to the moment he uncuffed a federal judge and told her she was free to go, without ever once saying he was sorry. The provision was accepted without objection. Weeks later, Judge Nadira Osei returned to a routine that from the outside looked unchanged. She drove to the courthouse each morning, presided over her docket, reviewed briefs, issued rulings. Her colleagues treated her no differently. Her clerks asked no questions. The work of the federal bench continued, as it always had, steady, deliberate, and bound by the principle that the law applied equally to every person who stood before it. She did not give interviews. She did not appear on cable news panels or accept invitations to speak at rallies. She declined every request for comment from journalists who wanted her to become a symbol of something larger than what had happened to her. She had never needed the public to validate her authority. The Constitution did that. And the record she had built over 9 years on the bench spoke louder than any headline ever could. But at a private bar association dinner held that fall in Atlanta, attended by judges, attorneys, and legal scholars from across the Southeast, she was asked to say a few words. She stood at the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room for a moment before speaking. He looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. I looked at him and saw a system that had never been held accountable. Now it has. She returned to her seat. The room was silent for a long moment before the applause began. In Beaumont County, the changes moved slowly, but they moved. The Civilian Oversight Board held its first public meeting 4 months after the consent decree was signed. Residents who had never attended a government meeting filled the room. Some of them brought the complaint forms they had filed years earlier, the ones that had been dismissed with identical language and forgotten in filing cabinets. They wanted the new board to see what had been ignored. The board accepted every document. Deputy Chief Camille Pryor led the department's transition with the kind of quiet authority that came from 2 decades of doing the work without needing to perform it. She reviewed every open case file, reassigned patrol routes to eliminate the concentration of enforcement in predominantly black neighborhoods, and implemented a ride-along program that paired new deputies with community leaders during their first month on the job. She did not give speeches about reform. She simply changed how the department operated. One policy, one hire, one interaction at a time. The Sunoco station on Highway 9 still sold gas. The pump still hummed on Saturday afternoons. The same concrete lot where Osei's knees had bled was patched and repainted that spring, though not because of the incident. The station manager never spoke publicly about what happened, but regular customers noticed that the exterior surveillance system was upgraded to 8 cameras within a month of the trial, and a small handwritten sign appeared taped to the inside of the cashier's window that read, "All customers are welcome here." Yvonne Shelton, the retired school teacher who had posted the first video, was interviewed by a documentary crew that fall. She sat in her living room with her hands folded in her lap and said, "I didn't do anything special. I just kept the camera on. That's all it takes sometimes. You just don't look away." Her video, the original Facebook post with the single-line caption, remained online. It had been viewed over 14 million times. Wade Purcell served his sentence at a federal correctional facility in central Georgia. He did not give interviews. He did not issue a public apology. He did not write to Judge Osei or to any of the 47 victims identified during the investigation. Through his attorney, he maintained that he had been doing his job and that the prosecution was politically motivated. The statement was reported once and forgotten. His name, however, was not. It appeared in law enforcement training materials distributed to police academies across 3 states. It appeared in civil rights law textbooks used at 14 universities. It appeared in a DOJ brief cited in 2 subsequent federal cases involving racially motivated policing. He would carry it for the rest of his life. Not the badge, not the title, just the name, attached permanently to a body camera recording that showed a man in uniform laughing at a black woman who told him she was a federal judge. Kyle Britton served his 3-year sentence and was released to a world that had no place for him in law enforcement. His certification was permanently revoked. He moved out of state and did not return to Beaumont County. Jessup and Lott served their 18-month sentences and similarly disappeared from public life. None of them issued apologies. None of them demonstrated any understanding of the harm the body camera had captured so clearly. In the new Civilian Oversight Office in Beaumont County, a framed photograph hung on the wall opposite the entrance. It had been taken from the gas station's exterior surveillance camera, a wide-angle shot showing a black woman in handcuffs standing beside a black Cadillac Escalade. An American flag hung from the awning above her. A sheriff's cruiser sat parked at an angle behind her vehicle, blocking her in. The image was sharp and unambiguous. Beneath it, a single line was printed in plain black text on a white card. Accountability begins where arrogance ends. No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. The record was already written. And the woman in the photograph was already back on the bench, doing the work she had always done, in a country that still needed her to do it. If you think this situation was bad, wait until you see what happens in the case on the right-hand side.
I need your ID now. Don't play smart. You people always think rules don't apply to you.
I am a federal prosecutor. You have
You
no
hear me?
warrant.
You're
Step
on my
back.
street.
Show us some respect before we rough you up.
Cooperate.
This is my home. You are breaking the law.
Lies.
At 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, federal prosecutor Vanessa Achebe was loading her briefcase into the back seat of her car in her own driveway. She was 44 years old, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, heading to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., where she served as a senior trial attorney in the Civil Rights and Public Corruption Division. She had spent the last 16 years prosecuting dirty cops, abusive federal agents, and officials who believed their authority placed them above the law. Her conviction rate was one of the highest in the office. Her husband, Colonel Idris Achebe, was an Army JAG officer currently deployed overseas. Their two children, 9-year-old Naomi and 12-year-old Elijah, were still asleep inside the house. The street was quiet. Sprinklers clicked across a neighbor's lawn. A woman 3 doors down walked a golden retriever along the sidewalk. The houses were large, well-kept, set back from the road with mature trees and clean driveways. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Vanessa placed her coffee on the roof of the car and checked her phone. She had a 9 a.m. briefing on a police misconduct case and 3 depositions later in the week. She didn't notice the black SUV turning onto her street. She didn't see the white van behind it. By the time she looked up, they were already parked, and the morning she had planned was already over. A black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburban and a white government van stopped 2 houses short of Vanessa's driveway. 4 men stepped out. The lead agent was Craig Burnham, 46, a supervisory detention and deportation officer with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He had been with ICE for 18 years, most of them spent running aggressive sweep operations across the D.C. metro area. His internal file held a pattern his supervisors had chosen to ignore. Sealed complaints for excessive force, warrantless entries, and a documented habit of targeting mixed-race households and immigrant-adjacent communities. None of it had ever resulted in discipline. His second was Agent Dale Fenton, 31, 5 years on the job, a man who had built his short career by mirroring Burnham's worst instincts without question. 2 junior agents stayed near the vehicles. Burnham held a printed photograph and a target address. The address belonged to a 62-year-old Guatemalan woman who had missed an immigration hearing after being hospitalized. She lived 3 streets away. But Burnham never verified the house number. He saw Vanessa, a black woman, standing in the driveway of a home he assumed matched his paperwork. He didn't cross-check. He didn't pause. He folded the paper into his vest pocket and started walking up the driveway. Burnham reached the top of the driveway and stopped 5 feet from Vanessa. His posture was wide, one hand resting on his belt, the other pointing directly at her. "I need you to identify yourself. Name and date of birth. Now." Vanessa set her phone down on the roof of the car beside her coffee. Her voice was calm. "Who are you, and why are you on my property?" Burnham flashed a credentials wallet in a quick motion, too fast to read the name or agency seal, then snapped it shut. "Federal Enforcement Operation. I need your identification immediately." Vanessa didn't move. "Do you have a warrant?"
We don't need a warrant, Burnham said. Vanessa looked at him, then at Fenton, who had moved to her right, positioning himself between her and the driver's side door. She turned back to Burnham. I'm a senior trial attorney with the United States Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division, and yes, you do need a warrant to be on my property demanding identification. So I'll ask again, do you have one? Burnham's expression didn't change, but his jaw shifted slightly. A lot of people claim to be a lot of things, ma'am. That doesn't change what's happening here. I need your name, and I need your cooperation. You're on private property without a warrant, without probable cause, and without my consent, Vanessa said. I'm asking you to leave. Burnham didn't step back. He stepped closer. Fenton mirrored the movement from the side, his hand now resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. Neither of them had any intention of leaving. And Vanessa, who had spent her career standing across from men exactly like this in federal courtrooms, understood in that moment that what was happening on her driveway was no longer a conversation. It was a confrontation. Vanessa reached into the open back seat of her car and pulled her Department of Justice credentials from the outer pocket of her briefcase. She held them up, badge and photo ID visible. I am a federal prosecutor. This is my home. You have no warrant, no probable cause, and no authority to be here. Burnham glanced at the credentials for less than a second. He didn't read the name. He didn't look at the photo. He looked back at her face. Put your hands on the vehicle. Vanessa kept the credentials raised. I'm not going to do that. You have no legal basis to detain me. I'm citing the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. You are in violation of it right now. Fenton leaned toward Burnham and muttered, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear. Those can be faked. You can buy those online. Vanessa's eyes moved to Fenton, then back to Burnham. You're looking at an authenticated DOJ credential with a federal bar number. I suggest you verify it before you do something you cannot undo. Burnham closed the distance. His right hand shot forward and locked around Vanessa's left wrist. She didn't pull away. Her voice stayed level, but rose in volume. You are assaulting a federal officer of the court on her own property without a warrant. He twisted her arm behind her back. Her shoulder torqued. She exhaled hard, but didn't scream. Across the street, a door opened. Howard Alston, 71, a retired federal appellate judge who had served 28 years on the bench, stepped onto his front porch. He raised his phone and began recording without a word. Next door, another door opened. Dominic Quarles, 53, a former Secret Service agent who had spent 20 years on presidential details, walked down his front steps and stopped at the edge of the driveway. His voice cut across the morning air. Take your hands off that woman right now. Burnham didn't turn around. Fenton looked over his shoulder at the growing audience, but said nothing. And Vanessa, her arm pinned behind her back, her suit pulling at the shoulder seam, stood completely still. Not because she couldn't resist, but because she knew exactly what would happen to a black woman who fought back against federal agents in her own driveway. Burnham drove his weight forward and forced Vanessa down. Her knees hit the driveway first, then her hip, then her cheek against the cold pavement beside her own car. The fabric of her suit tore at the knee. Her briefcase fell from the back seat and landed open next to her. Fenton moved in and pressed his palm into her shoulder blade, pinning her flat. Burnham pulled her wrists together behind her back and snapped the cuffs on. The click echoed off the garage door. Vanessa did not struggle. She did not raise her voice. She spoke clearly, loud enough for every camera and every neighbor now standing on their lawns to hear. My name is Vanessa Achebe. I am a senior trial attorney with the United States Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division. My DOJ employee number is 77431. I do not consent to this detention. I do not consent to this search. I have not been shown a warrant. Near the vehicles at the curb, one of the junior agents had unfolded the operational paperwork and was scanning it with a flashlight. He looked at the house number on the mailbox, then back at the sheet. He walked quickly toward Fenton and said something low, close to his ear. The address doesn't match.
This isn't the target residence. Fenton glanced at the paper for half a second, then looked away. He said nothing. He kept his hand on Vanessa's shoulder. Burnham stood up and keyed his radio. "This is Unit 4. We have a non-compliant subject in custody at the location, requesting transport for processing." Vanessa turned her head against the pavement. "I am compliant. I am not resisting. You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your career." Then the front door of the house opened. Naomi Achebe, 9 years old, barefoot in cotton pajamas, stepped onto the front porch. She saw her mother face down on the driveway, wrists cuffed behind her back, 2 men standing over her. She screamed. The sound cut through the entire street. Howard Alston's phone, still recording from across the road, caught every second of it. The child's cry, the mother on the ground, the agents who didn't even look up. Vanessa's voice broke through the stillness that followed her daughter's scream. "Do not enter my home. You do not have a warrant. I do not consent." Burnham ignored her. He looked at Fenton and gestured toward the front door. "Secure the premises. Make sure no one else is inside." Fenton stepped over the threshold and pushed past Naomi, who was frozen on the porch, tears streaming down her face, one hand gripping the doorframe. The junior agent followed, his expression tight, his eyes already scanning the hallway as though he knew they shouldn't be there. Inside, the house was quiet except for the sound of footsteps on hardwood. Family photos lined the staircase wall, framed diplomas, a wedding portrait. Fenton moved into the kitchen and started opening drawers. The junior agent checked the living room, glancing at a bookshelf filled with legal texts and military histories. Then a voice came from the top of the stairs. "Mom?" Elijah Achebe, 12 years old, stood on the landing in a t-shirt and basketball shorts, eyes wide. Fenton pointed at him. "Come down here. Sit on the floor. Hands where I can see them." Elijah descended slowly, lowered himself to the hallway floor, and placed his palms flat on the wood. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He stared straight ahead at the wall across from him, where his father's official army portrait hung in a polished frame. Colonel Idris Achebe in full dress uniform, ribbons across his chest, American flag behind his shoulder. Next to it hung a row of framed commendations. A photo of Vanessa shaking hands with a United States Senator, another of her being sworn in by a federal judge, right hand raised, left hand on the Constitution. Fenton stopped in front of the wall. His eyes moved across the frames. The junior agent appeared beside him and whispered, "We need to leave, right now." Fenton didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the front door. Outside, Burnham stood over Vanessa, radio in hand, watching the neighbors multiply on their porches and lawns. He told her she would be transported to a federal processing facility. She turned her head and looked up at him with an expression that held no fear, only certainty. "You're going to lose everything over this. Every badge, every pension, every year you put in. All of it. Gone." Burnham stared down at her, and for the first time since he had stepped onto that driveway, something behind his eyes shifted. Howard Alston had not stopped recording, but his other hand had already been busy. From his porch, phone braced against the railing, he had made 3 calls in under 4 minutes. The first went to Judge Eleanor Voss, a sitting federal judge on the D.C. Circuit who had served alongside Alston for 9 years before his retirement. The second went to the director of the ACLU's Washington office, a woman he had known for 2 decades. The third went to a senior investigative reporter at the Washington Post. To each of them, he said the same thing. ICE agents have a federal prosecutor in handcuffs in her own driveway. No warrant. Her children are inside. I'm recording everything. At the curb, Dominic Quarles had moved his body directly between the black SUV and the street, blocking any departure. He held his phone at chest level, recording steadily, narrating in a calm, trained voice. "I am a retired United States Secret Service agent. I am witnessing what appears to be an unlawful detention of a civilian on her own property by federal agents who have not produced a warrant. There are 2 minor children inside the residence. Agents have entered the home without consent." 2 more neighbors stepped out. The first was a young woman named Sonia Pfeiffer, 29, a congressional staffer who worked for a member of the House Judiciary Committee. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, watching in silence, already composing a message to her office on her phone. The second was Renata Molina, 52, a practicing immigration attorney who had handled hundreds of removal cases. She walked directly up to Burnham. "Officer, you are in violation of the Fourth Amendment, 8 U.S.C. Section 1357, and ICE Directive 11072.1, regarding sensitive locations and warrantless operations. I am documenting every action you take from this point forward." Burnham looked at her. "Ma'am, I need you to step back and disperse." Nobody moved. Not Alston on his porch. Not Quarles at the curb. Not Molina 3 feet from Burnham's face. Not Pfeiffer on the sidewalk. And 7 blocks away, inside the U.S. Attorney's office, Vanessa's desk phone had been ringing unanswered for 15 minutes. Her deputy checked the clock and picked up the internal line. The call came in at 7:02 a.m. Vanessa's deputy, a career prosecutor named Lionel St. Pierre, had tried her cell 3 times with no answer. She had never missed a morning check-in, not once in 6 years. He called the DOJ's Internal Security Division. Within 8 minutes, a security officer confirmed that no authorized federal operation had been scheduled in Vanessa's neighborhood that morning. No warrant had been issued with her name or address. No interagency coordination had been filed. By 7:14, the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General had been looped in. By 7:19, a senior DOJ official, whose name would never appear in any public report, picked up a secure line and called ICE headquarters directly. The message was 5 sentences long. "You have one of our senior prosecutors in handcuffs in her own driveway. There is no warrant. There is no probable cause. Her children are inside the home. Explain immediately." The ICE field office scrambled. Calls overlapped. Supervisors who had approved Burnham's morning operation without reviewing his target file were now reading it for the first time. Burnham's cell phone rang. His supervisor's voice was tight. "Release her. Now." Burnham kept his grip on the radio. "She was non-compliant. The situation isn't, 'Release her now and do not say another word. Do you understand me? Not one word.'" Burnham stared at the phone for a moment, then walked to where Vanessa still lay on the driveway. He knelt down and unlocked the cuffs without speaking. Then he spoke anyway. "This could have gone differently if you just cooperated." Vanessa sat up slowly. Her wrists were bruised and red. Her knee was bleeding through the torn fabric of her suit. Her daughter was still crying inside the house. Her son was still sitting on the hallway floor with his hands flat in front of him. 38 minutes had passed since Burnham first walked up her driveway. She looked at him and said nothing. She didn't need to. Everything that was coming for him was already in motion, and every second of it had been recorded. Vanessa sat on the front steps of her own home with her children on either side of her. Naomi pressed into her mother's arm and would not let go. Her small fingers gripped the torn fabric of Vanessa's sleeve, squeezing as though letting go meant it would all happen again. Her face was swollen from crying. Elijah sat on the other side, silent, staring at the place on the curb where the black SUV had been parked. He hadn't spoken a word since Fenton told him to sit on the floor of his own hallway. His hands still rested flat on his knees, palms down, exactly the way he had been ordered to hold them. He was 12 years old, and he had not moved them since. Vanessa's wrists were red and bruised where the cuffs had bitten into her skin. Her right knee bled slowly through the torn charcoal fabric of her suit. Her briefcase still lay open on the driveway where it had fallen. Howard Alston crossed the street carrying a glass of water. He sat down beside her without asking and handed it over. His voice was low. "I have 14 minutes of footage, Vanessa. Every second. From the moment he touched you to the moment he took the cuffs off." Dominic Quarles walked up the driveway, phone still in hand. "I have it from the street angle, full audio. They entered your home without consent, without a warrant, and without exigent circumstances. Renata Molina appeared beside him and handed Vanessa a single sheet of paper. It was a handwritten summary of every legal violation she had observed, organized by statute, time-stamped from memory. Vanessa looked at it, folded it carefully, and placed it in her jacket pocket. By 8 a.m., she had spoken with the Inspector General's office by phone, retained outside counsel through a former colleague at a civil rights firm, and emailed her supervisor a preliminary incident report with 5 attachments. She did not go to work that day. She drove her children to their pediatrician and requested trauma screening for both of them. Naomi held her arm the entire way. Elijah sat in the back seat and said nothing. By noon, the Department of Justice Inspector General had opened a formal investigation into the conduct of ICE agents at the Achebe residence. The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Professional Responsibility was notified and assigned a parallel review. ICE's Office of Principal Legal Advisor received a federal preservation order covering all body camera footage, GPS vehicle tracking logs, radio transmissions, operational planning documents, and the target file Burnham's unit had used that morning. The operational file was damning before anyone even reached the footage. The target was a 62-year-old Guatemalan grandmother named Lucia Estrada Vélez, who had missed a scheduled immigration hearing 3 months earlier because she had been hospitalized for a cardiac episode. Her address was listed clearly on every page of the file. It was 3 blocks from Vanessa's home. A different street, a different house number. Vanessa's name, address, and photograph appeared nowhere in any document. Burnham had gone to the wrong house and had never checked. Federal investigators then pulled Burnham's body camera records. His camera had not been activated during the operation. A review of his equipment history revealed that his body camera had failed to record during 7 of his prior complaints, every single one involving allegations of excessive force or racial targeting. The pattern was no longer deniable. But the 2 junior agents assigned to the operation had activated their cameras when they exited the van. Their footage captured everything. The approach, the demand for identification, Vanessa holding up her DOJ credentials, Burnham grabbing her wrist, the takedown on the driveway, Fenton pinning her shoulder to the pavement, the cuffs snapping shut, the front door opening, Naomi stepping out in her pajamas, the scream, the agents pushing past a crying child to enter a home they had no legal right to be inside. A 12-year-old boy ordered to sit on the floor of his own hallway with his hands visible. The footage was 22 minutes long, and every frame of it was now in federal hands. Federal investigators pulled Craig Burnham's full personnel file within 48 hours. What they found was not a single lapse in judgment. It was a pattern that stretched across nearly 2 decades. 14 formal complaints had been filed against Burnham during his career with ICE. The allegations were consistent: excessive force, racial targeting, warrantless entries into private residences, verbal intimidation of subjects and their families. 6 of those complaints had been filed by immigration attorneys representing clients Burnham had detained. 3 came from community advocacy organizations documenting patterns in his unit's operations. 2 had been filed by other federal employees who witnessed his conduct during joint operations and found it alarming enough to put on record. Every single complaint had been administratively closed without discipline. Not one resulted in a suspension, a reprimand, or even a formal counseling session. Fenton's file was thinner, but told the same story from a different angle. In every operation where a complaint had been filed against Burnham, Fenton had been present. His behavior mirrored Burnham's precisely. The same language, the same posture, the same refusal to de-escalate. He had never once intervened, questioned an order, or filed an internal concern. Then the emails surfaced. An internal correspondence chain between Burnham's field supervisor and a regional operations director included a message dated 14 months before the Achebe incident. The supervisor described Burnham as aggressive but effective, gets numbers, doesn't leave empty-handed. The message made clear what ICE leadership had valued: arrest statistics, closure rates, not constitutional compliance, not civil rights, not the law Burnham had sworn to uphold. Investigators interviewed the junior agent who had flagged the wrong address on the morning of the arrest. His statement was direct. He told them he had checked the operational paperwork against the house number while Burnham was detaining Vanessa. He walked to Fenton and told him the address did not match. Fenton's response, captured on the junior agent's own body camera audio, was 4 words: "Shut up and hold the perimeter." The junior agent returned to the van. He did not intervene further, but he also did not turn off his camera. Howard Alston provided his 14 minutes of footage to the Washington Post the following evening. The paper published its story the next morning under a front-page headline that would be read in every newsroom, congressional office, and federal agency in Washington. ICE agents arrest black federal prosecutor in her own driveway without a warrant. The footage went online at the same time. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed more than 2 million times. Cable networks ran segments on loop throughout the day, cycling between Alston's porch footage, Dominic Quarles' street-level recording, and stills pulled from the junior agent's body cameras that had been entered into the federal record. One image dominated everything. Naomi Achebe, 9 years old, barefoot in cotton pajamas, standing in the doorway of her own home, mouth open, screaming, while her mother lay face down on the driveway, in handcuffs 10 feet away. That image was shared across every platform, reprinted in every major newspaper, and projected on screens during 3 separate cable news panels before the end of the first day. It became a symbol that no official statement could contain. Civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs supporting the federal investigation and demanding expanded oversight of ICE field operations. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a formal statement calling for immediate congressional hearings. 3 sitting senators sent a joint letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security demanding Burnham's termination, Fenton's termination, and a full operational audit of Burnham's unit going back 5 years. ICE headquarters released a statement 36 hours after the story broke. It called the incident an operational error currently under review and expressed the agency's commitment to professional standards and accountability. The public response was immediate and furious. Operational error did not explain a man grabbing a federal prosecutor on her own property. It did not explain cuffs on a woman who had shown her DOJ credentials. It did not explain agents entering a home without a warrant and ordering a 12-year-old boy to sit on the floor. And it did not explain the sound of a 9-year-old girl screaming on camera while 4 grown men stood over her mother and did nothing. The phrase operational error trended online for 2 days, not as a defense, as an indictment. A federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after the incident and returned indictments against both agents. Craig Burnham was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, unlawful entry of a private residence, assault on a federal official, and filing a false operational report. The false report charge stemmed from Burnham's post-incident documentation in which he described Vanessa as a non-compliant subject who refused to identify herself and exhibited hostile and evasive behavior. Every word of it was contradicted by 3 separate video recordings and the testimony of 6 civilian witnesses. Dale Fenton was indicted on the same charges minus the false report, with an additional count of conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Prosecutors argued that Fenton had received direct information from the junior agent that the address was wrong, had ignored it, and had continued participating in an unlawful detention and warrantless entry with full knowledge that no legal basis existed for either. The 2 junior agents cooperated fully with federal investigators from the first interview. Neither was charged. One had provided the body camera footage voluntarily before being asked. The other had given a written statement confirming the address discrepancy and Fenton's instruction to shut up and hold the perimeter. Burnham's field supervisor was referred for administrative action on charges of failure to supervise and enabling a documented pattern of civil rights abuse through sustained inaction on complaints. He was not criminally charged, but was stripped of his supervisory role and placed on unpaid leave pending a disciplinary board review. Within the same month, Burnham was terminated from ICE. Fenton was terminated the following week. 3 additional supervisors in the DC field office were disciplined for their roles in the systemic mishandling of prior complaints. 1 was forced into early retirement. 2 were demoted and reassigned to administrative positions with no operational authority. The DC field office of ICE was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all future enforcement operations, warrant verification protocols, and mandatory review of any complaint involving allegations of racial targeting or excessive force. The consent decree would remain in effect for a minimum of 5 years. The office that had once described Burnham as aggressive but effective was now answering to a federal monitor who would review every operation before it left the building. The trial of Craig Burnham began on a Monday in the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse in Washington, D.C. It lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution's case was built around 22 minutes of body camera footage recorded by the 2 junior agents. The jury watched it in full on the first day. They saw Burnham approach Vanessa in her driveway. They heard her identify herself calmly as a federal prosecutor. They watched her hold up her DOJ credentials. They saw Burnham glance at them for less than a second and order her to put her hands on the vehicle. They watched him grab her wrist. They watched him twist her arm behind her back and force her to the pavement beside her own car. They heard the sound of her knees striking the concrete. They saw Fenton press her shoulder flat to the ground. They heard the cuffs click. They heard Vanessa recite her name, her title, her employee number, and her refusal to consent, all while face down on her own driveway. And then they heard the front door open. They saw Naomi step out, and they heard the scream. Several jurors looked away. One pressed a hand to her mouth. The footage continued. Fenton pushing past the child. Elijah ordered to the floor. Agents opening drawers in a home they had no warrant to enter. The wall of photographs and commendations that told them exactly whose house they were standing in. Use of force experts testified over 3 days that there was zero legal or tactical justification for any physical contact with Vanessa. She had identified herself, she had presented credentials, she had not made any threatening movement. Constitutional law professors walked the jury through the Fourth Amendment violations point by point. Warrantless seizure of a person, warrantless entry into a home, absence of probable cause, absence of exigent circumstances. Vanessa testified on the 9th day. She was precise, composed, and unshakable under cross-examination. She described the stop, the demands, the grab, the takedown, the cuffs, the sound of her daughter's voice. She did not raise her voice once. Burnham's defense argued he had been following standard operational protocols and had made a good faith mistake based on the information available to him. The prosecution dismantled this in closing by displaying the operational file side by side with Vanessa's actual address. The numbers were not close. They were not even on the same street. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on every count. Burnham stood motionless as the verdicts were read. Fenton, who had pleaded guilty 2 weeks before the trial in exchange for a reduced sentence, sat in a separate courtroom awaiting his own sentencing. Burnham received 5 years and 4 months in federal prison. Fenton received 2 years and 8 months. The judge, before closing the proceedings, spoke directly from the bench. The Constitution does not have an exception for expediency. It does not have a carve-out for haste, for assumption, or for the arrogance of men who believe a badge exempts them from the law. You terrorized a family in their home because you could not be bothered to check an address. And when you were told you had the wrong house, you did not stop. That is not an error. That is a choice. And today, that choice has consequences. Vanessa filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, Craig Burnham, and Dale Fenton. The complaint cited unlawful detention, excessive force, warrantless entry, assault on a federal official, and intentional infliction of emotional distress on 2 minor children. The evidence was so overwhelming that settlement negotiations lasted less than 3 weeks. The case settled for $4.2 million and sweeping institutional reforms. Mandatory warrant verification protocols requiring agents to confirm target addresses against 2 independent sources before any enforcement action. GPS address confirmation for all operations. Body camera activation as a non-negotiable condition of employment, with automatic termination for any agent who deactivated or failed to record during an operation. And an independent civilian review board with full authority over complaints involving racial profiling or excessive force, reporting directly to the DHS Inspector General and bypassing the chain of command that had protected Burnham for 18 years. Colonel Idris Achebe returned from deployment 5 weeks after the trial. He stood beside his wife at a press conference on the courthouse steps, in full dress uniform, their children between them. He did not speak. He did not need to. Vanessa returned to the U.S. Attorney's Office and was promoted to Chief of the Civil Rights Division. She established a legal defense fund for families targeted by unlawful immigration enforcement. It took on 30 cases in its first 6 months. Naomi Achebe, in a 4th-grade essay, wrote 7 sentences that were viewed more than 4 million times. The last line read, "My mom fights for the Constitution every day. One morning, she had to fight for it in our own driveway." Weeks later, Vanessa walked into the federal courthouse carrying the same briefcase that had fallen open on her driveway that morning. Nothing about her stride had changed. The only difference was that now, when she told the jury no one is above the law, she carried the proof in the scars on her wrists. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.
Upholding justice is a vital pursuit, and understanding acts as your armor. Thank you for joining us and demanding transparency.